Every afternoon, like clockwork, she walked home from school. 16 years old, quiet in the way that wasn't shy, just careful. She moved with her shoulders slightly hunched, not out of fear, but habit. Like she'd learned long ago that taking up less space made life easier. Her backpack was worn at the edges, her sneakers scuffed from miles of pavement, and her headphones, always in her ears but never playing music. They were armor, a signal to the world, I'm not looking for conversation. Her name was Naya, not that anyone at school ever used it much. Eastwood Heights wasn't a big town. Everyone knew everyone, or thought they did. The high school sat on a hill overlooking rows of modest houses, chain-link fences, and corner stores with flickering neon signs. It was the kind of place where routines mattered. Same bus stop, same lunch table, same faces day after day. And for Nia, that routine had started to feel less like comfort and more like a trap. It began subtly. A snicker in the hallway, a whisper just loud enough to catch. Then came the nicknames. At first they were vague. Hey, Dark Cloud or Midnight, thrown like pebbles from a distance. She'd pretend not to hear. Keep walking. Eyes forward. But words have weight even when you don't acknowledge them. They settle in your chest, heavy and slow. Then one Monday, as she waited for the bus that never came, it was always late on Mondays, 3 older students from the senior class appeared. They didn't walk up like they wanted anything real, just hovered nearby, loud and loose-limbed like they owned the sidewalk. One of them, tall with a crooked grin, leaned against the bus stop sign and said, "Yo, charcoal, mind scooting over?" "Don't want to get stained." Laughter followed, sharp and quick like a match striking. Nia didn't move. She just stared at the cracked pavement, counting the seconds until the bus would, hopefully, show up. But inside, something twisted. Charcoal. It wasn't the first time she'd heard it, but it was the first time it felt like a door slamming shut. Not just a joke, a label, a way to reduce her to a color, a thing you burn, something dirty you wipe off your hands. She didn't cry. She never cried at school. Crying meant giving them what they wanted, a reaction, proof that their words stuck. So she stayed still. Silent. Let the moment pass like a bad smell on the wind. But that night, lying in bed with her window open to the hum of crickets, she couldn't shake it. She thought about her grandmother's hands, strong, brown, always dusted with flour from baking sweet potato pies. She remembered how her grandma used to say, "Baby, your skin holds the sun. Don't let nobody make you feel like it's something to hide." Naya believed that. She really did. But belief doesn't always shield you from the sting of being singled out, mocked, made to feel like you don't belong in your own skin. The next few days, the group waited for her again. Not every day, just enough to keep her on edge. Sometimes it was just one of them. Sometimes all 3. They'd appear near the bike racks, by the soda machine, once even outside the library, always with that same lazy cruelty like it was sport. "Charcoal's at it again," one would say if she dropped a pencil. "Careful, she's going to leave soot on your desk." Another time, someone photoshopped her yearbook photo to look like a burnt matchstick and passed it around study hall. She saw it, didn't say a word, just tucked the paper into her notebook and walked out. But walking away didn't make it stop. If anything, it made them bolder. She started changing her route, took the long way home, cutting through the park even though it added 10 minutes, walked faster, head down, shoulders tight. She avoided eye contact with everyone, not just them, but teachers, classmates, even friends. It wasn't that she didn't trust people. It was that she didn't want to explain. Didn't want pity. Didn't want to be the girl who got picked on. She just wanted to be Nia, the one who loved old jazz records, who wrote poems in the margins of her math homework, who could fix a bike chain in under 5 minutes. Not charcoal, her mom noticed, of course. Moms always do. "You okay, baby?" She'd ask over dinner, stirring a pot of collard greens. "You've been quiet." "I'm fine," Naya would say, pushing peas around her plate. Just tired, but she wasn't fine. She was tired, yes, but not from schoolwork. She was tired of carrying this invisible weight. Tired of rehearsing responses in her head that she never said out loud. Tired of wondering if she'd ever walk down the street without feeling like she had a target on her back, just for existing the way she did. Then came the rainy Tuesday. The sky had been gray all day, thick with clouds that finally broke just as the final bell rang. Students scattered like startled birds, pulling hoodies over their heads, sprinting for buses or cars.
Nia didn't run.
She walked steadily, her thin jacket soaked within seconds. She turned down the shortcut behind the shuttered laundromat, the one with the broken awning that still offered a sliver of cover. It was usually empty, safe. Not today. There they were, all three of them, huddled under the awning like they'd been waiting. Tyler, the ringleader, stepped forward as she approached. Water dripped from his hood onto his smirk. "Well, well," he said, voice slick with false cheer. "Look who decided to show up. Charcoal braving the rain? Hope you don't melt." His friends chuckled, shifting their weight like they were ready for a show. Nia stopped a few feet away. Rain slid down her face, mixing with something hot behind her eyes. She could turn around, walk back, call her mom. But something in her, something quiet and deep, said no. Not this time. She didn't reach for her phone. Didn't raise her voice. Just looked at him. Really looked like she was seeing him for the first time. And then, calm as the space between heartbeats, she said, "Say it again." "I dare you." The words hung in the wet air. Tyler blinked. His smirk faltered. He wasn't expecting that. None of them were. For a second, no one moved. Rain pattered on the awning. A car splashed through a puddle down the street. Then Tyler recovered, shoving her shoulder lightly like testing ice. "Or what?" He sneered. "You gonna cry?"
Go tell your mommy?
But Nia didn't flinch. She held his gaze steady. "No," she said. "I'm gonna make sure everyone hears exactly what you just said. And why you think it's funny." Something in her tone, the quiet certainty, made him step back. Just an inch. But it was enough. She walked past them then, under the awning, close enough to smell the wet cotton of their jackets. Her heart pounded, but her steps didn't hurry. She kept walking, straight-backed now, rain soaking her hair, her clothes, her shoes, and for the first time in weeks she didn't feel small, because she'd finally done it. She'd stopped running, and that small act, just standing her ground, just speaking, felt like the first real breath she'd taken in months. She didn't know what came next. But she knew one thing: she wasn't charcoal, she was Nia, and she was done letting them decide who she was. Quen 3 Max 8:36 a.m. The rain kept falling all night, tapping against Nia's bedroom window like it was trying to get her attention. She lay in bed, wide awake, replaying the moment under the awning over and over. Not the shove, that barely registered. It was the look on his face when she'd said, "Say it again." "I dare you," that flicker of surprise. Almost like he'd expected her to crumble, and when she didn't, he didn't know what to do with himself. For the first time, she hadn't just endured. She'd pushed back, even if it was just with words. But now, in the quiet dark, doubt crept in. Had she made things worse? Would they come after her harder now? Would they spread rumors, twist the story, make her look like the aggressor? Her stomach twisted. She knew how these things worked. The loudest voice usually won, especially if it belonged to someone who already fit in. Still, something felt different. Not lighter exactly, but sharper. Like a fog had lifted just enough for her to see a path forward, even if it was muddy and unclear. The next morning, she got ready slowly. She washed her face, braided her hair tight against her scalp, and put on her favorite hoodie, the deep red one that made her feel grounded. She didn't wear it for attention. She wore it like armor, the kind that didn't clank or shine, just held her together. At school, she kept her head up, not defiantly, just present. She made eye contact with the lunch lady when she took her tray, smiled at the kid who always sat alone in chemistry, said good morning to her history teacher. Small things. But they mattered. They reminded her she wasn't invisible. Not really. She saw them before third period, huddled near the lockers, laughing too loud. Tyler glanced her way, then quickly looked away. His friends followed his lead. No taunts, no nicknames, just silence. And that silence? It was louder than any insult. By lunch, Nia was buzzing with restless energy. She sat with her usual group, 2 girls who liked poetry and 1 guy who could recite every line from The Lion King. But she couldn't focus on their conversation about weekend plans. Her mind kept circling back to one thought. What if I'd recorded it? Not to trap anyone, not to humiliate, but to prove it happened. Because she knew, deep in her bones, that if she ever reported them, someone would say, "Are you sure? Maybe you misunderstood." Or worse, boys will be boys. She'd heard it before, seen it happen to others. So after school, instead of heading straight home, she went to the public library. not for books. For answers. She sat at a computer in the quiet corner, fingers flying over the keyboard. She looked up her school's anti-bullying policy. Read about harassment based on race, appearance, identity. Learned that repeated name-calling tied to skin color wasn't just teasing, it was discrimination. And schools had to act on it. Her heart pounded as she scrolled. This wasn't just about hurt feelings. It was about rules, about rights. Then she opened a new note on her phone. Started typing. October 10th, called Charcoal by Tyler and 2 others near bus stop. Laughed. Said I'd stain the sidewalk. She added the time, the weather, what they were wearing. Details mattered. That night, she dug through old messages, screenshots, even voice memos she'd accidentally recorded during group projects, where someone had made a joke about her hair or her lunch. She didn't have much, but she had enough to show a pattern. She wasn't planning revenge. She wasn't looking for a fight. She just wanted to be seen, truly seen, not as a punchline, but as a person who deserved respect. The next day, she brought her phone with her, not hidden in her pocket, but in her hand, screen dark, but ready. She walked her usual route, but this time she wasn't hiding. She was watching. And sure enough, around 3:15 p.m., there they were, leaning against the brick wall of the closed-down laundromat, same as before. Tyler spotted her first. He nudged his friend, said something low. They straightened up, grins returning like they'd rehearsed this moment. Naya kept walking. Didn't speed up. Didn't slow down. As she got closer, Tyler called out, Well, if it isn't," she stopped. Looked right at him, and lifted her phone slightly, not pointing it, just holding it where he could see. "Go ahead," she said, voice calm, clear. "Say it again. Let's hear how it sounds when it's recorded. Let's see how it plays in front of the principal. The school board. Maybe even the local news." His mouth hung open for a second. Then he laughed, but it was forced, nervous. "You're joking, right? You're gonna record me?" "I've been recording for days," she said. "Every time you've called me charcoal, every laugh, every shove. It's all here." She tapped her phone. "You really want to add to the collection?" His friends exchanged glances. One of them muttered, "Dude, let's just go." But Tyler wasn't ready to back down. He stepped forward, trying to sound tough. "You think you're so smart?" "You're just looking for attention." "No," Nia said, holding his gaze. "I'm just tired of being treated like I don't matter. And if you say one more word about my skin, my name, my family, you'll find out exactly how much I do matter." The air between them crackled. Rain clouds gathered again, heavy and gray, but neither of them moved. Then something unexpected happened. Tyler looked away, mumbled something under his breath, too low to hear, and turned, walking off with his friends trailing behind, quieter now, shoulders hunched like they'd lost something. Naya stood there for a long moment, heart racing, hands steady. She hadn't yelled, hadn't cried, hadn't thrown a punch. She just stood her ground, with truth, with preparation, with quiet strength. That night, she didn't lie awake worrying. She sat at her desk, organizing her notes, labeling files, writing down exactly what she wanted to say if she ever got the chance to speak up, not just for herself, but for anyone who'd ever been made to feel small for how they looked. She thought about going to the principal the next day. But then she had another idea, bigger, bolder. What if she didn't just report it? What if she shared it? Not the recordings, those were for safety, but the story. Her truth. In her own words. She remembered how her grandma used to gather the neighborhood kids on summer nights and tell stories. About ancestors, about resilience, about pride. Those stories didn't shame anyone. They lifted everyone. Maybe that's what her school needed. Not punishment first, but understanding. So she drafted an email. Not angry, not dramatic, just honest. She asked for a chance to speak at an assembly. Not to call anyone out by name, but to talk about what it feels like to be reduced to a nickname. To explain why words like charcoal aren't harmless. To share who she really was, beyond the color of her skin. She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. And then she waited. The next morning, the hallway felt different. People looked at her, not with pity or gossip, but curiosity. Some even nodded as she passed. Word had spread. Not the ugly kind. The kind that said, she stood up. She's not backing down. At lunch, one of Tyler's friends, quiet, usually in the background, sat down across from her. He didn't say much, just pushed a folded note toward her plate. She opened it later, alone in the bathroom stall. It read, "I didn't think it was that bad. I get it now, sorry it wasn't perfect. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a start." Naya tucked the note into her journal next to her grandma's old recipe for sweet potato pie. 2 different kinds of nourishment, both necessary. She still didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time she wasn't afraid of the unknown, because she'd stopped waiting for someone else to fix it. She'd become the fix. The email sat in her sent folder like a stone dropped into still water. Nia checked her phone every few minutes, half expecting it to bounce back unread. Or worse, get a cold formal reply saying, "We appreciate your concern, but school assemblies are reserved for approved student groups." She'd braced herself for that. But 2 days later, during third period biology, her phone buzzed silently in her pocket. A message from the school office. "Principal would like to meet you after school. Please come to room 104, her stomach flipped. Not with fear this time, but with something sharper, brighter. Purpose. She walked into the principal's office that afternoon with her notebook tucked under her arm, not as a shield, but as proof. She didn't bring anger. She brought facts, dates, quotes, screenshots, voice memos labeled clearly. Oct 10 bus stop. RT 12 locker hallway. K 14 laundromat awning. She'd even printed out the school's own anti-harassment policy, highlighting the lines about demeaning language based on race or appearance. The principal, a woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense bun, listened without interrupting. She didn't sigh, didn't roll her eyes, didn't say kids say dumb things, it's not a big deal. She just nodded, took notes, and asked quiet questions. How long has this been going on? Did you feel safe? What do you think would help? That last question surprised Nia. No one had ever asked her that before. Not really. I don't want them suspended, she said, surprising herself. I mean, I want it to stop, but I also want them and everyone else to understand why it hurts. Not just don't do it, but why it's wrong. The principal leaned back, studying her. You asked for an assembly, Nia nodded. Not to shame anyone, but to talk. About names, about respect, about how words can cut even when there's no blood. There was a long pause. Then the principal said, Most students come in here wanting revenge. You're asking for understanding. That's rare. They agreed on a plan. Not right away. There were protocols, approvals, parent notifications, but yes, there would be an assembly. In 2 weeks. Open to all grades. And Nia would speak. The news spread faster than she expected. By the next morning, people were looking at her differently. Not with pity, but with something like awe. A few kids stopped her in the hall to say, That's brave. One girl whispered, My cousin got called stuff like that too. Thank you. Even teachers gave her small, respectful nods, but not everyone was on board. Tyler didn't show up to school for 2 days. When he finally returned, he avoided her completely, ducking into classrooms early, taking different hallways, never making eye contact. His friends acted like they didn't know her. But one afternoon, as she passed the bleachers after track practice, she saw him sitting alone, staring at his shoes. He didn't look angry, he looked lost. She didn't go over, didn't say anything. But she noticed. Meanwhile, Naya threw herself into preparing. Not with fancy speeches or dramatic lines, she hated that performative stuff. She wanted it real. So she wrote from her heart. She dug out old photos, her grandma holding her as a baby, her dad teaching her to ride a bike, her little cousin braiding her hair on a summer porch. She wrote about what her name meant, Nia, purpose, intention in a language older than this country. She wrote about how being called charcoal wasn't just mean. It erased everything that made her her. She practiced in front of her mirror. Then in front of her mom, who cried halfway through and hugged her so tight Nia couldn't breathe. You're gonna change things, her mom whispered. Just by speaking your truth. The night before the assembly, she couldn't sleep. Not from nerves, but from hope. What if someone in that gym had been called something awful and never told anyone? What if hearing her story gave them courage? What if Tyler actually listened? The morning of the assembly, the school buzzed like a hive. Posters lined the halls. Respect starts with words. Teachers reminded students to be open-minded. Even the lunch menu had a note. Today, we listen. Nia wore her red hoodie again. Not for armor this time, for reminder. This is who I am. And I belong here. She stood backstage, heart pounding as the gym filled. Hundreds of students shuffled in, laughing, groaning about missing study hall, tossing crumpled papers like it was just another boring school event. But then the lights dimmed. The principal walked to the mic. "This isn't a punishment," she said. "It's a conversation. And today we're listening to someone who chose courage over silence." Then it was Nia's turn. She walked to the center of the stage. No podium, just her and the mic. She didn't look at the crowd right away. Took a breath. Felt the weight of her name in her chest. Then she began. She didn't start with the bullying. She started with her grandma's kitchen. The smell of cinnamon and burnt sugar. The sound of old jazz playing on a scratched record. She talked about how her grandma used to say, "Your skin is a map of where your people have been. Don't let nobody tell you it's ugly." She showed a photo of herself at 6 years old, grinning with missing teeth, holding a sunflower taller than she was. "This is me," she said. "Not charcoal, not a joke, just me." Then she told the story calmly, clearly. Not to accuse, but to explain how it felt to hear that word, how it made her want to disappear, how she almost did. "And I get it," she said, finally looking out at the crowd. "Maybe you didn't think it was a big deal. Maybe you thought it was just a nickname. But imagine if someone called you lard or freckleface or glasses every day, not as a friend, but to make you feel small. Would it still be funny?" She paused. The gym was so quiet you could hear the AC humming. "I'm not here to get anyone in trouble," she said. "I'm here to ask, what if we used words to lift each other up instead of tear each other down?" Then she did something unexpected. She turned toward the back row where Tyler sat, head down. She didn't point, didn't name him, but she said, "And if you've ever said something hurtful without meaning to, it's not too late to do better." A beat of silence. Then from somewhere in the bleachers one person clapped. Then another. Then the whole gym rose. Not in a standing ovation, but in a slow, steady wave of respect. Afterward, students came up to her one by one. Some just hugged her. Others said, "I never thought about it like that." A teacher handed her a note from a shy freshman who wrote, "I've been called Oreo since middle school. Today I felt seen, and Tyler, he didn't come up." But as she was packing her things, she saw him near the exit talking quietly with the principal. He looked up once, just for a second, and gave a small, awkward nod. It wasn't an apology. Not yet, but it was a beginning. That night Nia sat on her porch wrapped in a blanket listening to the crickets. Her phone buzzed, a message from the school paper. "Can we interview you for next week's issue?" She smiled, not because she wanted fame, but because the story wasn't ending, it was just getting started. The days after the assembly moved differently, slower somehow, but also lighter. It wasn't that everything changed overnight. Hallways still echoed with chatter, lockers still slammed, and the lunch line still moved at a snail's pace. But something underneath had shifted. Like the air itself had cleared, Nia noticed it in small ways. A group of freshmen who used to whisper when she passed now said, "Hey," like they meant it. A teacher started opening class with a check-in question. "What's one thing someone did this week that made you feel seen?" And kids actually answered. Even the school newspaper ran a full spread titled, "Words That Stick," When Nicknames Hurt, with quotes from students of all backgrounds sharing their experiences. One line stood out. "It's not the word, it's the weight behind it." But the biggest surprise came a week later. During lunch, she was sitting alone for once, scribbling ideas in her notebook for a new poem, when a shadow fell across her tray. She looked up, and there he was, Tyler, not smirking, not flanked by his usual crew. Just him, hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders hunched like he was bracing for a storm. He didn't sit, didn't say much at first, just stood there, shifting his weight, eyes darting around like he expected someone to yell at him for being near her. Finally, he mumbled, "Can I talk to you for a sec?" Nia closed her notebook slowly. "Sure," he took a breath. "I read the article. The one in the paper, about, he paused. "I didn't get it before. Like I thought it was just a dumb joke. But my little sister, she's 10, and she asked me why someone would call you charcoal, and I couldn't answer her without sounding like a jerk." Nia stayed quiet. "Let him find his way. I didn't mean to make you feel like that," he said, voice low. "I swear. It was just what we did. Like it was the thing. But that's not an excuse, right?" "No," she said gently. "It's not. He nodded like he'd expected that. I signed up for the diversity committee thing. The one Ms. Ruiz started after your talk. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I want to learn. She looked at him, not as the boy who'd mocked her, but as someone trying, however clumsily, to do better. That's a start, she said. He gave a small, awkward smile. Thanks for not, making me the villain. You were never the villain, she said. Just part of a story that needed to change. He left then, walking a little taller than when he'd arrived. And Nia went back to her notebook, but this time she wasn't writing about pain. She was writing about possibility. That same week, a teacher approached her after class. You've got a gift for making people listen, she said. Ever thought about starting a club? A space where students can share their real stories, names, cultures, struggles, joys, without fear. The idea took root fast. Within days, flyers appeared on bulletin boards. Real talk, share your story, hear others. No rules except two: be honest. Be kind. The first meeting was held in the old art room, the one with the big windows and paint-splattered floors. Nia didn't know if anyone would come. 15 students showed up. Some came because they'd been bullied. Others because they'd done the bullying and wanted to understand why it hurt. One girl talked about being called Taco since elementary school. A quiet boy shared how kids mimicked his accent, even though he'd been born 3 blocks from the school. Another student spoke about being adopted and never feeling like he fully belonged anywhere. Nia didn't lead like a teacher. She listened like a friend. And when it was her turn, she didn't repeat her assembly speech. She talked about her grandma's hands again, how they could knead dough, braid hair, and wipe away tears all in the same afternoon. That's what real strength looks like, she said. Not loud, just steady. The club met every Thursday. Attendance grew. Kids brought poems, family recipes, photos, songs in languages most had never heard. One week, a senior played a guitar piece his grandfather taught him in Oaxaca. Another time, a freshman read a letter she'd written to her younger self. You don't have to shrink to fit in. Teachers started noticing, not just the emotional stuff, but the academic shift. Attendance went up in classes where students felt seen. Fewer hallway fights, more collaboration. Even the cafeteria felt different. Less cliques, more mixing. Someone started a name tag day where everyone wrote their real name and what it meant. Amina, trustworthy. Dev, light. Nia, purpose. And Tyler, he kept showing up to the diversity committee. At first he just sat in the back, arms crossed. But slowly he started speaking up. He helped organize a cultural potluck. Brought his mom's cornbread. She says it's the best in 3 counties, he joked. And for the first time it didn't feel forced. He even apologized quietly to the girl he'd once called Oreo in middle school. She accepted, not because she had to, but because she saw he meant it. None of it was perfect. There were still awkward silences, missteps, moments when old habits crept back in. But the difference was this. Now, when someone slipped, someone else would say gently, "Hey, remember what we talked about?" And the person would nod, say sorry, and try again. Naya's mom started calling her the quiet spark. You didn't shout, she said one night over dinner. You just lit a match and let others see by its light. At school, the principal asked if she'd help design a new unit for health class, about identity, respect, and the power of language. Nia agreed, but only if students helped write it. So they did. They created role plays, discussion guides, even a short film where actors played out real scenarios. How to respond when you hear a hurtful joke. How to apologize when you mess up. How to be an ally without taking over. The project got featured in the local paper, then a regional education blog. But Nia didn't care about the attention. What mattered was the kid who came up to her after school one day, eyes wide, and said, "My little brother starts here next year. I'm not scared for him anymore." That was the real victory, because this wasn't just about one nickname. It was about building a place where no one had to walk home with their head down, headphones in, hoping to disappear. It was about making sure the next Nia wouldn't have to choose between silence and survival. And as she walked home that evening, same route, same sneakers, same red hoodie, the sunset painted the sky in gold and rose. She didn't hurry, didn't hunch her shoulders. She walked like she belonged, because she did. And now so did everyone else who'd finally learned to see each other, not as labels, but as people. Full, messy, beautiful people with stories worth hearing. The laundromat awning still stood, cracked and weathered. But now when students passed it, they didn't think of shame. They thought of the day someone chose courage and changed everything. A year later, the old laundromat awning still stood, same cracked concrete, same rusted sign. But no one lingered there to mock anyone anymore. In fact, students sometimes sat under it during lunch, sharing snacks or flipping through poetry books from the new student-led lending library. The spot that once meant fear now meant rest. That's how deep the change went. Not loud or flashy, but quiet, steady, like roots growing under pavement. Nia was a senior now. Her red hoodie had faded to a soft rose, but she still wore it on days she needed grounding. She wasn't the girl who got bullied anymore. She was the one who started the Real Talk Club, co-wrote the school's new Respect curriculum, and helped organize the first-ever cultural story night, where families came to share food, music, and memories under string lights in the gym. Attendance had doubled each year, but what surprised her most wasn't the recognition. It was the ripple. She saw it in the way freshmen walked the halls, shoulders back, voices clear. In the way teachers paused before using a nickname, even a friendly one, and asked, "Is that what you go by?" She saw it when a new student from Somalia walked in on the first day, nervous and quiet, and 3 different kids introduced themselves before homeroom even started. "We've got your back," one said, handing her a club flyer. Everyone's story matters here. Even Tyler had changed. He wasn't best friends with Nia. Some wounds don't heal into friendship, and that's okay. But they'd found a kind of peace. He'd become a regular at Real Talk, often helping set up chairs or run the sound system. Last month, he'd stood up during a discussion about microaggressions and admitted, voice shaking, "I used to think if I wasn't calling names myself, I wasn't part of the problem. But staying quiet? That's part of it too." The room fell silent. Then someone clapped. Then everyone did. He'd applied to a community college with a social justice program. "Want to fix things I didn't even know were broken," he told Nia once, half joking, but his eyes were serious. Nia, meanwhile, had been accepted to a small liberal arts school 3 states away. She'd be studying education and creative writing. Her acceptance letter mentioned her exceptional leadership in fostering inclusive dialogue. She'd laughed when she read that. She never set out to lead. She just refused to disappear. Her grandma, now in her 80s but still baking pies every Sunday, had framed the letter and hung it next to her recipe cards. "You're doing what our people have always done," she'd said, flour dusting her apron. Turning pain into purpose. Graduation day arrived warm and bright. The gym, once the site of that first trembling speech, was now filled with families, balloons, and the soft hum of pride. Nia walked across the stage not as a victim, not as a hero, but as herself. Full, complex, unapologetically Nia, after the ceremony. As students tossed their caps and hugged like they'd never see each other again, a group of underclassmen found her near the bleachers. They were from the Real Talk Club, kids she'd mentored, listened to, sometimes cried with. "Will the club keep going?" One asked, eyes wide. "Of course," Nia said. "It was never mine. It's yours now." She handed them a binder, filled with meeting plans, discussion prompts, even a list of local counselors who offered free student sessions. "Just keep one rule," she said. "Be honest. Be kind." They promised. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and fireflies blinked on in the schoolyard, Nia sat alone on the steps, watching the last of the cars pull away. She thought about the girl she'd been, headphones in, shoulders tight, walking home like she was trying not to take up space. That girl deserved better, and somehow, against all odds, she'd gotten it. Not because someone swooped in to save her, but because she chose to speak, and in doing so gave others permission to speak too. The next week, she helped pack up the club's supplies. Posters came down. Books were sorted. But the impact stayed. Teachers said discipline referrals had dropped by 40% since the assembly. Counselors reported more students asking for help, not just with bullying, but with identity, belonging, self-worth, and the nickname. Charcoal hadn't been heard in over a year. Not because it was banned, though the school did update its harassment policy, but because it simply didn't make sense anymore. How do you reduce someone to a color when you've heard their story, when you've tasted their grandma's pie, read their poem, sat with them in silence after a hard day? You don't. That's the thing about real change. It doesn't come from rules alone. It comes from connection. As Nia packed her own boxes for college, she found an old notebook tucked in her closet. Flipped it open. There on the first page in shaky handwriting, "I just want to walk home without feeling like I'm too much or not enough." She smiled, closed the book, slipped it into her suitcase, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of how far she'd come. She never asked to be a symbol, never wanted a spotlight. She just wanted to be seen. And in asking for that, she'd helped an entire school learn to see each other. Now, when new students asked about the faded mural near the main office, a swirl of hands in different shades, with the words, "Your name is your power," painted in bold letters, they were told the story. Not as a warning, but as an invitation. Because the lesson wasn't just about bullies getting taught a savage lesson. It was about what happens when someone chooses dignity over silence. When a community chooses empathy over ease, when words once used to wound are reclaimed to heal, Nia didn't leave behind a monument. She left behind a mindset, and that lasts longer than any headline, any viral moment, any nickname. Years later, alumni would come back and point to that mural, bring their own kids to sit under the laundromat awning and say, "This is where it started." With one girl who refused to be erased. But Nia would just smile, wherever she was. Maybe teaching in a classroom, maybe writing books, maybe still baking pies with her grandma, and say, "It didn't start with me. It started the day we all decided to listen." Because real courage isn't about the moment you fight back. It's about the moment you choose to believe you, and everyone else, deserve to belong.